The bitter spring wind whipped across the plains as Tabitha Hale watched her brother Edmund scribble his name on a piece of paper that would seal her fate, trading her away for a pouch of gold coins and a deed to a plot of land she'd never see. The year was 1878, and in this dusty corner of Colorado territory, a woman's worth could still be measured in cattle and currency. "Sign here, miss," said the stranger, a man with yellowed teeth and eyes that made her skin crawl. He slid the paper toward her, but Tabitha's trembling hands remained clenched at her sides. "I won't," she whispered, her voice stronger than she felt. At 20 years old, she'd spent her life being told what to do by her brother since their parents died, but this was a step too far. Edmund's face darkened. "You will. I've had enough of feeding another mouth when I could be building something for myself." He grabbed her wrist, twisting until she cried out. "This arrangement benefits us both. Mr. Wilkes here needs a wife and I need his money." Tabitha's eyes darted around the crowded saloon, searching for anyone who might help. Most patrons kept their heads down, nursing their whiskey as if the sound of her soft weeping was nothing more than the creaking of floorboards. "The lady doesn't seem willing," came a deep voice from behind them. All heads turned to see a tall figure silhouetted in the doorway. As he stepped into the lamplight, Tabitha caught her breath. He was lean but broad-shouldered, with dark hair peeking from beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his blue eyes were clear and steady. "This doesn't concern you, stranger," Edmund spat. The newcomer moved with deliberate steps until he stood between Tabitha and the men. "I believe it does." He turned slightly, keeping his eyes on the men while addressing her. "Miss, are you entering this arrangement of your own free will?" Before she could answer, Edmund lunged forward, only to freeze as the stranger's coat shifted, revealing a holstered revolver. "Name's Xavier Thorne," the cowboy said calmly, "and I suggest you gentlemen reconsider your business here tonight." The tension in the room was palpable as Xavier stood unwavering before Tabitha, a human shield against her brother's greed and Wilkes' lecherous intentions. Minutes stretched like hours until finally, Edmund snatched up the coins from the table. "Keep her then," he snarled. "She's always been more trouble than she's worth." As Edmund stormed out with Wilkes reluctantly following, Tabitha felt her knees weaken with relief. Xavier Thorne turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you all right, miss?" Tabitha nodded, unable to form words as the reality of what had just happened washed over her. Her own brother had tried to sell her to a stranger, and another stranger had saved her. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice barely audible over the resumed murmur of the saloon. Xavier Thorne touched the brim of his hat. "No man should treat a woman as property." He hesitated, then added, "Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" The question brought tears to her eyes. "No, my brother. That was my home." Xavier nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Jenkins runs a respectable boarding house at the edge of town. I can escort you there if you'd like." Tabitha looked at this man, this stranger who had stood between her and a fate worse than death. She had no reason to trust him, yet something in his steady gaze told her she could. "I have no money," she admitted. "We'll figure something out," he replied simply. As they stepped out into the night, Tabitha felt a peculiar mixture of terror and hope. The world she'd known had crumbled beneath her feet, but perhaps, just perhaps, she'd find solid ground again. Mrs. Jenkins was a stern-faced widow with kind eyes who took one look at Tabitha's tear-stained face and ushered her inside without questions. Xavier explained the situation in low tones while Tabitha warmed her hands by the fire. "I can work," Tabitha offered when Mrs. Jenkins approached. "I can cook and clean, and I'm good with a needle." The older woman nodded. "We'll talk about that tomorrow. For now, you need rest." Xavier cleared his throat. "I'll cover a week's board," he said, placing coins on the table. "That should give Miss Hale time to find her footing." Tabitha's eyes widened. "Mr. Thorne, I couldn't possibly consider it an investment in justice," he interrupted with a small smile. "Besides, I've been on the trail too long. I can spare it." After he left, Mrs. Jenkins showed Tabitha to a small but clean room. "That Xavier Thorne," she mused, "been passing through these parts for years. Never stays long, but always leaves things better than he found them." Alone in her room, Tabitha sat on the edge of the narrow bed and allowed herself to truly breathe for the first time in hours. Her brother had sold her. The thought made her stomach churn with a mixture of grief and rage. Edmund had always been cruel, especially after their parents died when she was 15, but she never imagined he would stoop so low. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with faceless men and contracts written in blood. When morning light filtered through the thin curtains, she rose and dressed in the same worn dress from yesterday, her only possession besides a locket containing a small portrait of her mother. Downstairs, Mrs. Jenkins had breakfast waiting. "Eat," she commanded. "Then we'll talk about what's next for you." Tabitha obeyed, surprised by her own hunger. As she ate, Mrs. Jenkins outlined possibilities. The general store needed help. The school teacher was looking for an assistant, or she could stay and help at the boarding house in exchange for room and board. "I'm good with children," Tabitha said. "I used to help at the school in our last town before Edmund moved us here." Mrs. Jenkins nodded approvingly. "I'll speak to Miss Franklin today." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Jenkins answered it and returned with Xavier Thorne following behind her. "Mr. Thorne," Tabitha said, rising from her chair, "I didn't expect to see you again." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. "I wanted to make sure you were settling in," he said. "And to let you know your brother and Wilkes left town on the early stage. I made sure of it." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "Live well," he said simply. "That would be payment enough." Mrs. Jenkins cleared her throat. "I'm going to see Miss Franklin about that position. Why don't you show Mr. Thorne around the garden? It's quite pleasant this time of morning." The garden was small but tidy, with early spring flowers beginning to bloom. They walked in awkward silence until Tabitha gathered her courage. "May I ask what brought you to that saloon last night? It seems like more than coincidence." Xavier's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Truthfully, I was tracking a man who owes money to some folks back in Denver, the kind of debt that gets collected one way or another." He paused. "I'm not a lawman, Miss Hale, but I'm not an outlaw either. I find people deliver messages, sometimes escort valuable shipments, whatever honest work pays." "A jack of all trades," she said. "Something like that." They continued walking, the silence more comfortable now. "How long will you stay in town?" she asked. "A few days. My business concluded rather abruptly when I saw what was happening to you." He glanced at her. "I couldn't stand by and watch." "There are many who could," she said softly, "and did." His jaw tightened. "Yes. There are always more watchers than doers in this world." Before they could continue their conversation, Mrs. Jenkins returned with good news. Miss Franklin would meet with Tabitha tomorrow about the assistant position. The school needed someone who could teach the younger children and help with sewing lessons. Xavier took his leave shortly after, tipping his hat and promising to check in before he left town. Tabitha watched him go, a strange emptiness forming in his absence. The next morning, she met with Miss Franklin, a serious young woman not much older than herself. The interview went well, and Tabitha was offered the position on the spot. The pay was modest but enough to cover her room and board with a little left over. You start Monday, Miss Franklin said, shaking her hand firmly. The children will be glad to have you. I've been overwhelmed since Mrs. Peterson moved away. Tabitha walked back to the boarding house with a lightness in her step she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she was supporting herself, making her own decisions. The sense of freedom was intoxicating. She found Xavier sitting on the porch of the boarding house, whittling a small piece of wood. "Mr. Thorne," she greeted him, unable to contain her smile. "I got the position at the school." He looked up, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "Congratulations, I had no doubt you would." "It's not much, but it's a start," she said, sitting beside him. "My own start." "The best kind," he agreed. He handed her the small wooden figure he'd been carving, a bird with wings outstretched. "For luck in your new venture." Tabitha turned the carving over in her hands, touched by the gesture. "It's beautiful, thank you." They sat in companionable silence as the afternoon sun warmed the porch. Finally, Xavier spoke. "I'll be leaving tomorrow, heading north to Wyoming Territory." Her heart sank unexpectedly. "Oh, I see. I have a job waiting," he explained. "A cattle baron's son ran off with a substantial amount of his father's money. I've been hired to find him and bring him back." "It sounds dangerous," she said. Xavier shrugged. "It can be, but it's what I'm good at." Tabitha hesitated, then asked, "Will you come back through here?" After Wyoming, his expression softened. "I might. Would you like me to?" "I would," she admitted. "Very much." That evening, Mrs. Jenkins invited Xavier to join them for dinner. As they ate, Tabitha learned more about him. He'd been born in Pennsylvania, moved west after the war, worked as a scout for the cavalry before striking out on his own. He spoke little of family, and Tabitha sensed it was a topic best left untouched. After dinner, they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I've never thanked you properly," Tabitha said quietly. "Not just for stopping Edmund, but for giving me a chance at a real life." Xavier turned to look at her, his face half shadowed in the fading light. "You would have found your way without me, perhaps, but I'm glad I didn't have to." The next morning, Tabitha woke early to see him off. He was already loading his saddlebags when she came outside, the rising sun painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. "I made you some food for the journey," she said, offering a small parcel wrapped in cloth. "Thank you." Their fingers brushed as he took it, sending an unexpected warmth through her. "I wish you well, Miss Hale." "Tabitha," she corrected. "Please call me Tabitha," he smiled. "Tabitha." He mounted his horse, a handsome chestnut gelding. "I'll look for you when I return." She watched him ride away until he was nothing more than a speck on the horizon, wondering if he truly would return or if his words were merely a kindness to ease their parting. The days turned into weeks as Tabitha settled into her new life. She enjoyed teaching the children, who ranged from 6 to 14 years old. Miss Franklin was strict but fair, and the two women developed a cordial working relationship. Tabitha moved from the boarding house to a small room behind the schoolhouse, which reduced her expenses and put her closer to work. She began saving her money, determined to build a secure future for herself. She made friends in town: the shopkeeper's wife, the young woman who worked at the telegraph office, several mothers of her students. But often in quiet moments, her thoughts turned to Xavier Thorne and his promise to return. Summer arrived, bringing scorching heat and afternoon thunderstorms that cooled the air momentarily before the humidity returned. School let out for the harvest season, and Tabitha found herself with unexpected free time. She used it to improve her living quarters, sewing curtains and a colorful quilt for her bed. She planted a small vegetable garden and volunteered at the church, reading to elderly residents who could no longer see well enough to read for themselves. One sweltering afternoon in late July, Tabitha was returning from the general store when she spotted a familiar figure emerging from the sheriff's office. Her heart leaped as Xavier Thorne stepped onto the boardwalk, looking much as he had the day he left, perhaps a bit more weathered from his travels. He saw her at the same moment, and his serious expression transformed into a warm smile. "Tabitha Hale," he called, crossing the street to meet her. "You're a sight for sore eyes. You came back," she said, unable to hide her delight. "I said I would." He took the basket from her hands. "Let me carry that for you." As they walked toward the schoolhouse, Xavier told her about his time in Wyoming. The boy was easy enough to find. He'd lost most of the money gambling in Cheyenne. His father was more interested in teaching him a lesson than pressing charges. "And after that?" she asked. "I took a job escorting a geologist through Sioux territory, then another tracking a man who'd stolen horses from a ranch near Laramie." He glanced at her, "But I kept thinking about a promise I'd made to a schoolteacher in Colorado." Warmth bloomed in her chest at his words. "How long will you stay this time?" "Longer," he replied. "I've been offered a job as deputy here. Sheriff Baker is getting on in years and needs the help." "You're staying?" she asked, scarcely believing her ears. "I'm staying," he confirmed. "For a while, at least." Over the next few weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. Xavier would walk Tabitha home from wherever she happened to be in the evenings, and they would talk on the schoolhouse steps until the mosquitoes drove them inside. She learned that he had fought for the Union in the war, though he spoke little of those days. He had a younger sister in Philadelphia whom he wrote to occasionally. He preferred coffee to whiskey and could name every constellation in the night sky. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Kansas, her dreams of becoming a writer, the books she treasured. She confided how Edmund had changed after their parents died, growing bitter and resentful of the responsibility thrust upon him. "I tried to be useful, to ease his burden," she explained one evening, "but nothing I did was ever enough." Xavier's hand covered hers briefly. "The fault was his, not yours." As summer waned, their friendship deepened. The townspeople began to notice, exchanging knowing glances when Xavier escorted Tabitha to church on Sundays or when they were seen sharing lunch at the small cafe on Main Street. Mrs. Jenkins, who had appointed herself Tabitha's unofficial guardian, pulled her aside after Sunday services. "That deputy of ours has intentions, I believe." Tabitha blushed. "We're friends, Mrs. Jenkins." The older woman replied skeptically. "Friends don't look at each other the way he looks at you when you're not watching." The thought that Xavier might harbor deeper feelings sent a thrill through Tabitha, but she was cautious. Her experience with men was limited to her brother's cruelty and the unwanted attention of men like Wilkes. One crisp September evening, Xavier invited her on a proper outing. "There's a harvest dance Saturday at the Thompson farm. Would you allow me to escort you?" Tabitha hesitated only briefly before accepting. "I'd like that very much." The night of the dance arrived clear and cool, with a full moon illuminating the countryside. Xavier arrived at the schoolhouse looking uncommonly tidy in a clean shirt and vest, his usually unruly hair slicked back. "You look beautiful," he said when she emerged in her best dress. A simple blue cotton with white lace at the collar that she'd painstakingly altered to follow the latest fashion she'd seen in a catalog. The Thompson farm was transformed for the occasion, with lanterns strung between trees and tables laden with food prepared by every family in the county. A small band played lively tunes as couples twirled across the packed earth of the barn floor. Xavier proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, guiding her confidently through waltzes and reels. During a break in the music, he fetched them glasses of punch, and they stepped outside to cool off in the night air. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his voice low and intimate in the darkness. Very much, she replied truthfully. I can't remember the last time I danced. You move like you were born to it, he said, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their punch and listened to the night sounds, crickets chirping, the distant music from the barn, the occasional burst of laughter. Tabitha, Xavier began, then paused as if gathering his thoughts. These past months, getting to know you, they've been the best of my life. Her heart fluttered in her chest. Mine too. He set down his empty glass and took her hand in his. I've spent years wandering, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, but being here with you, it's made me want things I never thought I would. What things? She whispered, scarcely daring to hope. A home. A life that's about more than the next job or the next town. His thumb traced circles on her palm. A future with someone who makes me want to be better than I am. Tabitha stepped closer to him, drawn by the warmth in his voice and the sincerity in his eyes. I think you're already a good man, Xavier Thorne. I want to be worthy of you, he said simply. Under the vast canopy of stars, with the sounds of celebration surrounding them, Xavier lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. When she responded, lifting her hands to his shoulders, the kiss deepened into something that made her dizzy with longing. They returned to the dance with flushed cheeks and secret smiles, dancing closer than before, her head occasionally resting against his chest as they swayed to the slower tunes. When he walked her home that night, they lingered on the schoolhouse steps, reluctant to part. May I call on you properly? He asked, with intentions that go beyond friendship. Yes, she answered without hesitation. I would like that very much. The following weeks were a time of discovery and deepening affection. Xavier brought her wildflowers and books borrowed from the judge's extensive library. They took Sunday afternoon rides into the countryside, sharing a picnic lunch by the river. Tabitha found herself falling in love with his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, and the gentle way he listened when she spoke as if her thoughts were treasures to be carefully considered. As autumn painted the landscape in brilliant hues of red and gold, Xavier began building a small house on a plot of land at the edge of town. For the future, he explained when she questioned him. Whatever it may hold. School resumed, and Tabitha threw herself into teaching with renewed energy. Her students noticed the change in her, teasing her about her special friend, the deputy. Their courtship wasn't without challenges. Xavier's job sometimes took him away for days at a time, tracking down thieves or escorting prisoners to the territorial court. Each departure filled Tabitha with anxiety, memories of her brother's abandonment surfacing despite her best efforts to quell them. I'll always come back to you, Xavier promised before one such trip. Always. She believed him, but the fear remained, a shadow at the edges of her happiness. In late October, a letter arrived that shattered the peace Tabitha had built. It was from her brother Edmund, postmarked from a town in New Mexico territory. I know I've no right to ask, the letter began, but I'm dying. Consumption, the doctor says. I've no one else to turn to. Tabitha's hands trembled as she read his plea for forgiveness, for a chance to make amends before the end. Part of her wanted to burn the letter and forget it ever arrived. Another part, the part that remembered the brother who had taught her to ride and brought her sweets from town before their parents died, couldn't dismiss it so easily. When Xavier returned from his latest assignment, she showed him the letter. What do you want to do? He asked after reading it. I don't know, she admitted. He tried to sell me, Xavier, like I was no more than a horse or a cow. How can I forgive that? Xavier considered her words carefully. Forgiveness isn't about absolving him of what he did. It's about freeing yourself from carrying the weight of it. He took her hands in his. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. If you want to go to him, I'll take you there myself. His understanding gave her the strength to make her decision. I'll write to him, offer forgiveness, but from a distance. I won't go to him not because I can't forgive, but because I need to protect the life I've built. Xavier nodded, pride evident in his eyes. That's a wise choice. She wrote the letter that evening, a careful balance of compassion and boundaries. She told Edmond she forgave him but couldn't risk seeing him again. She wished him peace in his final days and enclosed a small sum of money to help with his care. As she sealed the envelope, she felt a burden lift from her shoulders. She was no longer defined by what had happened to her, by the choices others had made for her. She was Tabitha Hale, schoolteacher, friend, woman in love on her own terms. Winter descended on the town with a vengeance, bringing howling blizzards and temperatures that froze the creek solid. School was often canceled due to weather, leaving Tabitha with unexpected free time. She spent much of it with Xavier, helping him finish the interior of the small house he was building. They installed shelves for books, hung curtains at the windows, and arranged the simple furniture he'd acquired. "It's coming along nicely," she said one afternoon as they stood in what would be the main room, a fire crackling in the stone fireplace. "It's missing something important," he replied. "What's that?" Xavier turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You." Before she could respond, he dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Tabitha Hale, I've loved you since that first night when you showed more courage than anyone I've ever known. I love your kindness, your strength, your determination to create a good life no matter what obstacles are placed in your path." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to her eyes as joy welled up inside her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Xavier, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. They were married on Christmas Eve in the town's small church, decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the holiday. Tabitha wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Miss Franklin had helped her make, with a wreath of holly berries in her hair. Xavier waited for her at the altar, his usual rugged appearance transformed by a new suit and freshly cut hair. The look of wonder on his face when she walked down the aisle was something Tabitha knew she would treasure forever. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, held in the hotel dining room. There was dancing and feasting, laughter and tears of joy. When they finally departed for their new home, rice and good wishes showered down upon them. That night, as snow fell softly outside their bedroom window, Tabitha and Xavier began their life together as husband and wife. His touch was gentle, his words tender as he showed her the physical expression of the love they shared. Afterward, lying in his arms, Tabitha marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From the terror of that night in the saloon to the safety of this moment, it seemed almost like a dream. "What are you thinking?" Xavier asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best," she replied, tilting her face up to his. "If Edmond hadn't tried to sell me, you never would have stepped in. We never would have met." "I think we would have," he said thoughtfully. "Some people are meant to find each other, no matter what path they take." As winter gave way to spring, Tabitha and Xavier settled into married life. She continued teaching while he served as deputy, their evenings spent in comfortable domesticity. They planted a garden together, built a chicken coop, and began talking about children. In April, a telegram arrived with news of Edmond's passing. Tabitha felt a complex mixture of grief and relief, closing a chapter of her life that had been marked by pain. "Are you all right?" Xavier asked as she folded the telegram and put it away. Yes, she said, and meant it. I made my peace with him months ago. As summer approached again, Tabitha confirmed what she had begun to suspect: she was expecting their first child. When she shared the news with Xavier, his joy was boundless. He lifted her into his arms and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time. A baby, he marveled, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. Our baby. Their daughter was born the following winter, a healthy girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. They named her Hope, a testament to the force that had sustained them both through difficult times. As Tabitha nursed her daughter before the fire one evening, Xavier sat beside them, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked softly. "That night in the saloon, did you ever think we would end up here?" Tabitha looked around their cozy home, at her husband's loving face, at the perfect child in her arms. "Never," she admitted. "But I'm grateful every day that you stood between me and those men. You gave me more than safety, Xavier. You gave me the chance to find out who I really am." "And who is that?" he asked, his eyes warm with love. She smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I'm Tabitha Thorne, teacher, wife, mother, a woman who chooses her own path and walks it with courage," he added, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the town in pristine white. Inside, the small family remained wrapped in the warmth of a love that had begun with an act of courage and grown into something neither could have imagined. From the darkest moment of her life, Tabitha had found her way to the brightest future, one filled with love, purpose, and the freedom to be exactly who she was meant to be.